Your Honor, some animals are gross, vile, perhaps even yucky. Or so society says. I stand before you today in defense of some of the disgusting, slimy, freaky little fellas we find in our world, and I protest that we need some of them, whether we like it or not. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we're going to explore the underbelly of the natural world, and I hope you brought hand sanitizer. Now, we are all here today to hear the defense of a selection of the grossest animals that I hope will not necessarily find redemption in your eyes, but at the very least, understanding of the role that they play in our ecosystems. I do want to quickly pause the video here and say that I'm going to try and not make this super graphic and be as respectful as possible when discussing the topic of death. But if you don't like to hear about how animals eat each other or how things decompose, I totally understand, and I hope to see you in the next video. This just might not be the one for you. Okay, let's continue. I present my first defendants for today, our friendly neighborhood omens of death. When you hear the word scavengers, you may, like myself, immediately picture a vulture. Vultures are the quintessential scavengers and are always shown as movies as being the harbingers of death. Many cultures associate scavenging animals in general with death, but that's only because death is like their whole thing. Scavengers are species that forage for food that is left behind by either other animals or a circumstance of the environment. They feed mostly on dead, decaying organic matter, and despite how gross that sounds, they play a really important role in our ecosystems. When an animal passes away, its remains can carry diseases for long after, including any diseases that may have led to the animal's passing in the first place, or the animal's passing could encourage any parasites it was carrying to leave the body in search of a new host. By having animals that evolve stomachs of steel to be able to handle diseases, prions, parasites, means that the ecosystem can reduce the amount of disease that is accumulated and spread by carcasses and carrion. As much as we dislike birds like the vulture or other birds like the marabou or the adjutant, ecosystems need them. And to be honest, thanks for taking one for the team. There's an interesting vulture that doesn't so much help with this disease control, but does generally just kind of clean up the place. It's called the bearded vulture. This vulture is unique in the fact that it is the only animal on Earth whose diet is mostly bone. It's not just birds with stomachs of steel though. Mammals can also be efficient scavengers as well, like our famous best friends, hyenas. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may think you know hyenas, but maybe you don't. Hyenas are not dogs. They're actually more closely related to cats, and I protest that they have been the victims of slander. You may or may not have heard of an indie musical produced by this off-lot Hollywood studio called The Lion King. In this film, lions and hyenas are presented in conflict with one another. A classic case of a top predator being harassed by lowly scavengers, because hyenas will attempt to steal prey that has been felled by lions. Now, I'm not going to pretend that hyenas don't steal from lions, but lions also steal from hyenas. You see, this is a type of scavenging behavior known as kleptoparasitism, which is where animals steal food from other animals. Klepto, of course, meaning thievery, and parasitism meaning that it lives off of another creature. Lots of animals are kleptoparasites. Most predators will opportunistically steal from other animals, but kleptoparasites are something else. We know that hyenas and lions steal from each other, but the Lion King had it all backwards. Lions steal from hyenas more than hyenas steal from lions. though this may be because there are simply way more hyenas than lions, meaning lions just have more animals to steal from. Either way, lions and hyenas both steal food from one another, and both will also act as scavengers, joining the ranks of vultures as nature's vacuum cleaners, helping us clear potential diseases. There are other creatures that go beyond just scavenging though. Decomposers take this concept of clearing up organic remains one step further. They don't just eat meat, they eat everything, and they break it down into even more minute pieces. Flies are a species that I guess I'm not making a case for redemption here. It's more just an understanding that what they do is an extension of the benefit provided by scavengers. The only problem, of course, is that instead of the carcasses carrying diseases and scavengers removing them, diseases seem to exist just fine on the outside of a fly, and then the fly lands on something that you might actually eat, and boom, salmonella. So they help reduce one single location where there is a huge buildup of disease, but they spread disease in really small amounts far and wide. Your immune system can handle these small exposures to disease better, so the fly is reducing the risk of being overwhelmed by a disease exposure, but now you may be exposed to a disease that you never would have come in contact with because you're not eating carcasses or going near them because they stink. And now a fly has brought the disease to you. It kind of comes down to a would you rather question. Would you rather have small, likely manageable amounts of disease everywhere, or a large buildup of disease in one location? There are cons and cons for both of these scenarios. When talking about decomposition as a useful process though, earthworms are perhaps a better example. Beyond the removal of sources of disease, decomposers spread the nutrients that once existed in an animal back into the earth, where the pieces of this animal will become part of a tree or a fungus, and then eventually other animals again. It can sound disgusting, but decomposers allow beings that have passed away to rejoin nature, and I personally find it a comforting thought, despite the details. Earthworms are one of the best at this, and though their slimy bodies often make people uncomfortable, I do get the feeling that we treat worms with a little more respect than the other animals that I'm representing today, but I still want to take a minute to say thank you, worms. There are some animals around that aren't so picky about whether or not the blood they consume is alive or dead. I have no defense for mosquitoes. Bats are cool. They're little flying guys. Some of them have weird faces, but they are really normal animals that play really normal roles in our environment. And in fact, they fill roles similar to birds on most occasions. The vast majority of bats eat fruits and insects. Given that most bats eat fruit, they are actually often important pollinators and seed dispersers in the same way that birds and the bees are. Not the euphemism, the actual, yeah, you guys are smart, you know what I mean. I think bats get a bad rap because of a mix of circumstance and storytelling. Not all bats are nocturnal, but most are. And as with any animal that comes out at night, they're automatically pictured as creepy, because darkness shrouds everything in a layer of mystery, especially when you add tales of bloodsuckers to the mix. Vampire bats are known as sanguinivores, which means they consume blood. Which is really hard to do, by the way, because there are very few carbohydrates and vitamins in blood. It's actually kind of impressive. There are 3 species of vampire bat, and they are the only bats that sustain themselves on mostly blood, and they basically never drink from humans. I'm not going to lie to you, the number isn't 0, but it's very low. Also, I don't know if I'm alone in this assumption, but growing up, I guess I just assumed that vampire bats drank blood through their fangs, like they sucked it up through their teeth or something, or they just kind of went, you know what I mean? I don't know, but it turns out they actually use their fangs to pierce the skin and then they just lick the blood, which makes a lot more sense, I think. And I mean, that's sort of cute. Like, as far as drinking blood goes, it could be way worse, you know? I don't know, let's just move on. Bram Stoker's classic novel, Dracula, is set in the region of Transylvania in the country of Romania, and was written in 1897. On the other hand, vampire bats exist only in South and Central America. So Bram Stoker probably never encountered a vampire bat in his life, and bats being considered dangerous and spooky creatures of the night in a modern age at least, owes a lot of its reputation to this tale. Though bats were probably viewed negatively in many cultures long before this book, and are probably viewed negatively in many non-European cultures as a result of other stories, this one's pretty cemented in European cultures. I truly believe that while, yes, having a bat fly past your face at night when your senses are obviously dulled is probably very alarming, they aren't as bad as they're portrayed. They just give you a fright. And that can't be as bad as some of these other animals that carry diseases and start pandemics, right? I mean, no, I take it back. Urban environments are gross. We created gross spaces. They're often full of trash, full of smog, and full of ugly buildings. Then, when animals attempt to survive in this unforgiving environment, we turn around and call them gross too. May I present to you the tale of the pigeon. It's a tale you may have heard before. It presented on social media a while ago now and became quite popular, though I definitely was talking about it like way before all of that happened. You could call me a bit of a trendsetter. Objection, Your Honor. Ben's a loser. Well, that's unnecessary. We began our relationship with pigeons probably somewhere around the Mediterranean or Central Asia. Some claims say Mesopotamia, others say Egypt or Greece. Either way, we have a rich history of using pigeons to deliver messages dating back at least 1,000 years, probably more. These birds were kept. They were domesticated, and they joined our civilizations alongside us. Then we invented more forms of communication, like the telegraph, and from there all kinds of long-range transmission services like telephones and Xbox Live. Over time, we reduced our usage of pigeons to emergency services, and then smuggling methods, and then kinda nothing. Now, our cities are full of a species that we used to keep. A species that we used to encourage to be our friends. They became domesticated, only for us to turn our backs on them. And now, they hang around us, potentially out of an instinct that we gave them to be friendly. And they feed on our scraps, and they spread our diseases, and the reality of it all is that we betrayed pigeons. Their existence as gross is entirely our own fault. Something to think about the next time you hear them called rats of the sky. I want to take a minute to address all the pigeons watching at home and say, I'm sorry. Your Honor, for my closing statement, I would say, these animals add values in ways we often forget. Or at least they used to add value until we neglected them. Yet, even if they didn't, animals don't exist for humans. They don't need to be directly useful in order to be valuable. Some forms of life might act in ways that we find despicable, others might look kinda yuck, but the majority of species that we find disgusting are, in reality, just living their lives, and their appearances don't give us pass to take these animals at face value or write them off as not worth living. Except mosquitoes. I don't have a blooper today. I just wanted to take a second to thank everyone for watching my videos over the last 10 months or so. You have all been so incredibly supportive, and I really appreciate your kind words. I got my first YouTube member as well, which is pretty cool, so thanks to Friggin' Frog Lover. See you in the next video. Okay, bye.